Lucas County Jail today in 2023 is vastly different than it was in 2014 when we began the MacArthur Foundation Safety and Justice Challenge. We can now confidently say that we've reduced recidivism, in other words, reduced crime prior to trial, and we've also reduced jail population. The individuals in the jail were not being correctly served by the criminal justice system, nor was the population of Lucas County. So we needed to have the judges, the probation officers, the sheriff's deputies, Toledo police, the community police really look at what they were arresting for, and then once people were in the system, how we can have a fair and just adjudication while keeping the community safe. Early teens, the 2014-2013, Lucas County was looking at replacing its building. The jail itself the physical building is past its useful life. And when we asked the initial question to understand what we may need to build, who's even in the jail and why are they there, we realized that we didn't have a solid answer. When we started digging into the needs of the community and the jail population, we realized we can make the community a safer place and a more just place at the same time. And that's what's so exciting about the MacArthur Foundation making this national commitment to what they called the Safety and Justice Challenge. Repeat crime before trial can go down, and in Lucas County's case it did. You can reduce your jail population, meaning that people have a better chance of succeeding in life. Rather than being incarcerated, they can actually have better outcomes for themselves and their community, which Lucas County did. And that's why it's so important. I think that people everywhere would want to be able to say, this is my community. We have the right people in jail for the right reasons, and we also support people who are reentering, who are not committing crime. We have less recidivism, and we have a lower jail population.
You just heard from former Lucas County Commissioner Carol Contrada, and she was asking some questions that are being asked more and more all over this country these days. Who is in our jails, and why are they there? And we are talking jails tonight, folks. Local jails, county jails, the jail in the town wherever you're watching this. Why? Well, did you know that last year some 12 million people were booked into those local jails? That's a big number. In fact, it's like 19 times the number of people who were admitted to our state and federal prisons and penitentiaries. Let me toss another number at you, and remember these numbers, these are people. They all have faces, they all have names. They are people. Of those people sitting in local jails tonight, over 3 out of every 5 is innocent. Jerry, how do you know that? By legal standards, they are innocent. That is, no judge, no jury has found them guilty after hearing any measure of proof. They are accused, as any of us could be accused, but they are in jail. Oh, and there's this elephant in the room. African Americans in this country are jailed at 4 to 5 times the rate of white Americans. Let that sink in. All of which raises so many questions. In this program, we search for answers to those questions and to your questions. So let me welcome you to our town hall meeting, Rethinking Jails and Justice, a production of WGTE Public Media in collaboration with the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Safety and Justice Challenge. I'm Jerry Anderson. We are at the McMaster Center tonight at the Main Public Library in downtown Toledo. And as we welcome you to 2024, that means we're pushing some 10 years since then Lucas County Sheriff John Tharp walked into his bosses, the Lucas County Commissioners, and said, we need a new jail, but he added, we need to think about some things. In essence, he said we need to answer those questions that Carol Contrada was asking earlier. Now retired, former Sheriff Tharp talked with us recently, and I want you to listen closely for the reasons, the only reasons in his mind that people should be incarcerated locally.
There's only 2 reasons why people should be in the correction facility today. And the number 1 is they're a threat to the community, and number 2, if they're a flight risk. There's no reason that anyone should be in a facility because we're mad at them. At one time, Lucas County Correction Facility had close to 600 people in that facility. The facility was only built for like 340. The facility that is on Spillbush today is not a great facility for incarceration. I think we were having more information from the people that were working in the facilities as to the safety and well-being of the officers and also the inmates. The blind spots in the jail were the part that people were really nervous about. And with the new facility is that you'll have direct supervision. That means the officers will be right in the facility, right in the open area with the inmates. We need to make sure that we have humane treatment for the inmates, safe treatment for the inmates, and also the employees. So it's so important that we get this new facility built and making sure that it's built properly. With the Lucas County Correction Facility is that we need to make a determination who should be there. It's so important, they call it the PSA, the Public Safety Assessment. For the Public Safety Assessment is that you have to really identify crime the person had committed. Why are they in there? Is it a low misdemeanor, a non-violent misdemeanor? They are at low risk. The ones that can be released because we feel that they're not going to be a threat to the community. That space should be opened up for somebody else that we need to keep. There are individuals that shouldn't be released and that is a threat to society.
Former Lucas County Sheriff John Tharp. So let me welcome in the aforementioned Commissioner Carol Contrada out of retirement tonight, as am I, Carol Contrada. Good to have you here. You remember the conversation with John Tharp back in the day.
I do very well, and
Let me get you this microphone. Yep.
thank you so much.
You remember the conversation with John Tharp?
I do.
But I want you to remember at the same time a conversation you had with somebody in a position to know, and you recalled this, somebody who makes this their job, who told you something about what the needs of Lucas County would be if we didn't do anything.
Well, that's right. Sheriff Tharp came to the Board of Commissioners in roughly 2013, 2014, and talked about the need for a new jail. The old jail was beyond its useful life. It was over capacity. The capacity of the jail at that time was around, the rated capacity was around 370. And it was really, the building was falling apart. So the commissioners really didn't know where to begin. So we thought, well, let's take a look at the physical jail and see what size jail we would have to build. We hired a consultant. They looked at our practices, and they said, if you build a new jail, even though we were at about double the capacity, you would have to build a jail with a capacity of about 950, which was stunning. And we thought, is there a better way? We didn't know the answer. Maybe we would have to build a jail that big, but we didn't know. So we began by asking fundamental questions. Who's in the jail and why are they there? And trying to understand what the purpose of a jail was. And a jail really, it's a pretrial facility. It's not a sentence facility. And it's there for two things: to make sure people show up for trial, yep, and to prevent recidivism. In other words, crimes committed while waiting for trial if you're not in jail.
Imagine that if we would have had to have built the kind of jail that your consultant said you would have to do if we didn't do something. Well, we did do something, and that is what we are talking about tonight, and so we appreciate. So our town hall tonight features really a wide array of people who have been part of answering the thorny questions regarding criminal justice reform. Yeah, of course, that is the police and the judges. The judges are here. I plead innocent, just for the record. All right, but also the social networks. They have to be at the table when you're talking about the effects of, say, mental illness on people's behavior. What about the rampant drug use that fuels so many outcomes the system has to deal with? What about a community where young people and the not so young long for jobs or programming for our kids to keep them occupied and out of trouble? And what do we do after somebody's been in jail and they come out to get them back on their feet so they don't have to go back to jail? We have a live audience here at the McMaster Center, and with us for our town hall fielding those questions. Jason Hibbs is along, faculty member at Bowling Green State University. Mr. Hibbs, by the way, producing a series of podcasts in the year ahead on this very subject. And Jason, tell me about the podcast and also how people watching this can get involved with their questions.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jerry. So tonight, I'm sure it will come up that there were multiple phases of the MacArthur grant for criminal justice reform. reform. And the final phase was amplification. And what that means is the county was granted money to spread the word on the efforts, what was done. And I was asked by WGTE and the county to come along, not really for spin or PR, but to take the position of a reporter, former reporter myself here, and just ask everyone who was involved what went well, what didn't go so well, and what advice would you have for other communities attempting the same thing. So there are a series of 10 of these podcasts, and I'm trying to hear from as many voices as possible. Many of the faces up here today, you'll hear from them. That'll be a little later in the year uploaded to wgte.org/RJJ. So again, wgte.org/RJJ. Now that's for the podcast. Your question about questions tonight, now we were talking, kind of wondering how many questions we would get. That's not going to be a problem, Jerry. I'm hearing we have nearly 30 questions submitted already. Now, for those of you who are here in person, you want to look for Matt, Savannah, or Angel. Can you raise your hands? Matt, Savannah, Angel? Yeah, so look for these folks. If you have one of these cards, fill it out with the question. If you don't, ask for one, and we'll make sure we get that question answered. Now, for those of you streaming online, however you're streaming, whether that be YouTube, Facebook, or on WGTE.org, just go into the comments section, put your question there, and they will make sure that that question gets up here, and we'll make sure it gets answered.
Yeah,
Jerry.
Jason will get the questions to me. Jerry's not answering, but our panelists will be. So let's pick up our story now. In the mid-2010s, all right, Lucas County begins addressing questions about whether everybody in jail, including those awaiting trial, really needs to be in jail, all right? It knows that black people in Lucas County were between 5 and 7 times more likely to be arrested than white people. We'll explore that tonight. But then, and I want to know how this happened. Was it happenstance, karma, very good luck, or what? A national philanthropic organization, the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation, launched what is called the National Safety and Justice Challenge, a multi-year initiative to safely, underscore safely tonight, okay, folks? Safely reduce jail populations and reduce racial and ethnic disparities in jails. So we have 2 separate entities, one in Lucas County, one this national thing, go in the same direction, asking many of the same questions. So I'm wondering, but they're totally independent at that time of each other. So who found whom? Holly Matthews is the executive director of the Criminal Justice Coordinating Council. She's been on this issue dating back to when she was writing the first grants for the Safety and Justice Challenge. How did this come together?
I would say it was synergy. We were working on implementing the public safety assessment at this time. I had calls from my staff, Matt Hireman at the county, had calls from his mom hearing about this on NPR, so we were able to form a group, start the discussions, and we had great discussions at the beginning, and there is a team of us, Sherry Crane, who is here today, Matt Hireman, and myself, really synthesized all of the discussions and submitted the initial application to the foundation.
Okay, there was 20 cities originally and 10 got funded. We were one of 10 in the entire country.
Correct. We were originally funded for the planning phase, which was 20 jurisdictions. That narrowed down to 10, and we were one of the first 10 implementation sites.
And you would give me this. Much of the local efforts have addressed, if you will, systems, policing, court policies, assessing which of the accused represent any real threat, coordinating probation practices, that's in there, addressing the mental health aspect. Has it worked?
I would say it has. We have reduced our local jail population by 42% since the establishment of our baseline, and our baseline was from a 6-month period from 2015 to 2016.
All right, we have been talking to people as we prepare for this town hall. Been talking to lots of people. One of them is Christopher Scott. He's an employment director. He tries to connect people with the resources they need. And he has some thoughts on systems, but he starts out here in our community, if you will, addressing things like poverty and crime, education, and stabilizing life out here where we live to help keep people from being incarcerated or reincarcerated. Take a listen.
Crime and poverty are hand in hand, right? They go together. You know, where there's crime, you're going to have poverty. It doesn't matter really the color, black or white. The education piece is important, right? Making sure that the resources to elevate as the economy changes, right? There has to be a educational change as well to sustain. being able to get a certification within a year to be able to sustain your family, or opportunities to go back to school to receive some level of a degree, whether it's associates, bachelor's, whatever that may be, and even also teaching the skills. They may need resume help, they may need support with just interviewing practice, or how to even approach a job, you know, from the basics, right? Oftentimes, you know, you're dealing with barriers such as, you know, they don't have their IDs, they don't have their social security cards, birth certificates, they don't have housing, stable housing. So understanding why they go back, right? There's a stability here that's not out here, that's not afforded to me out here. So we start going ahead figuring out how can we stabilize them on the outside, then maybe, just maybe, we may not see them going so much on the inside. I had a gentleman come in, he wanted to get a forklift certification, right? He did not delay or waste any time. You know, he came in, said, I want to get my forklift. He didn't play about it. He was serious about it, and next thing I know, he came back and showed me his certification. Once he got that certification, he found him a job opportunity, elevated his income to $21 per hour. It's stories like that, you know, when you see people return home with that level of hunger, although it may be difficult to place them in the beginning because of the barriers down that they have with the felonies on their background, there's a tenacity that's there to keep going, to make sure that I get to where I'm trying to go because I'm thinking different about the world. So you get people who come out who are serious about it, and really what they need is that vehicle to help them find. Let's not just only think about what systems can do, because I think often when we think about what systems can do, we forget about what we can do as individuals.
So you heard systems at the end, but I heard a whole lot of community going on before that. County Commissioner Pete Gerken is here. He's been around this effort since the very beginning. As an administrator, making the trains run on time in Lucas County, I know you have to be a systems guy, but you also see these community issues, you hear about them, and frankly, you believe they should be addressed and should have been addressed in this effort earlier on in the process.
I think so, and I think the testimony we just got amplifies what we need to do. Let me say this, I've been proud to be part of this from day one, served alongside, behind, and adjacent to Commissioner Contrada, and thank you for her work, and she's such a digger on the facts, on the systems, on process. And this way we have a good balance. She's more of that. I'm more of what's the community saying. There's a guy in the audience that I know, and I quote him a lot. His name's Stan Smith.
Yeah.
Stan's been in jail a few times. Stan has not gone back to jail. And I asked Stan, how you stay out of jail, Stan? He says, Pete, I just quit breaking the law. And it's reduced to that. And so I know, Stan. So how do we get up? I want to get upstream of the problem. All the systems we put in place are post-arrest, right? How do people get in jail? Chief Troendle, you got arrested them, right? If we really want to solve for a lot of this, I think we need to continue to work upstream of the problem. That's community engagement. That's working with guys like Malcolm. That's working like Stan, Mike Hampton, people in re-entry. Let's keep them out of the system so we don't have to fix the system. It's much in the process.
Okay. And I'm going to get to Malcolm in just a moment with an introduction. Could we do this, panelists and panelists upcoming? When we use the word community tonight, could we try to get to something more specific?
Sure.
Is the community 450,000 Lucas Countyans? Is the community, is that word elected officials and bodies, city councils? Is it churches? Is it community organizations? What is community?
So let's start with the data that Carol and her team are so good at. We know where most of the arrests come from. We know the zip codes. We know those local areas that do it. So let's start with the grassroots people in those areas. Where are those communities that of real relevant to the people in those areas? Where is it the movement? Is it Salem Lutheran Church? Is it the Grace Community Center? We know where people are mostly getting arrested. Those people getting arrested are all brown and black, mostly. I'm not too concerned about people getting arrested on River Road. I am, but you got to start where the problem exists. So we engage those developed community assets that are already there, the people I just talked about. We fund them. We give them support. They get out ahead of it, so when they have an interdiction with the police, it may not end in an arrest.
Malcolm Cunningham directs the Mayor's Office of Neighborhood Safety and Engagement, reducing jail populations and racial and ethnic disparities. Tall task. You've got to believe this is a community issue, more than a cops and courts issue, or not?
It's a complicated answer. First, one of my challenges just as a public health practitioner is that we will never reach population change by focusing on an individual issue. We have to go upstream, kind of like what Commissioner Gerken was just saying, right? So When we speak about systems, I'm honestly not thinking about the criminal justice system. I'm thinking about systemic inequity, just to be frank. I'm thinking about highway construction that decimates a certain black and brown neighborhood, that begets the lowest household median income in the entire city, that results in a number of people that have been arrested from that particular zip code, right? So when we're talking about systems, I'm always thinking, what are the things that inform those things? It's kind of similar. This is a pretty bad analogy probably, so I'm already sorry for it before I even say it. We think about the microcystin outbreak that happened, and we had to turn off our water a few years back, right? We do need to filter our water. We do need to address the issues as they emerge, but a part of that issue is that there was overflow of phosphorus into the lake further and further upstream, right? So it's like, are we gonna address the phosphorus, or are we gonna address the microcystin on the other end, right? So how do we go further upstream? It's by acknowledging the problems and working where the problems are at the scale of the problems.
This is helping all to set the stage. Right now, let's get over to Jason, because so many of you have been asking questions of our panelists.
Yeah, so we're also accepting questions via email and online. This one came through us virtually. It says, it's from Mike McMahon from Toledo. Justice is a word that gets used quite a lot lately. Is justice for minorities the same as justice for white people? Shouldn't justice be viewed equally for all people? What about rules, laws, and consequences?
Well, I see, who hasn't answered yet? No, we have judges coming up in our next panel. But no, that does go to an issue of perceived inequities, that the system works different for people of different pigment. Do you folks sense that and see that in our community, that is a prevalent? I see you nodding, Commissioner.
And I would respond to that, yes, the justice system works at different levels. It's true, whether we want to believe it or not, it's true. The data shows us that. That's why we're doing this work, that there's disparity of who's in jail. The justice system works for people that have resources vastly different than it works for people that need a public defender and you have a lawyer. Track any case. You get a public defender, you get a different outcome many times than you have a lawyer who has an investigator and some resources. There are two justice systems. There's a minority justice system and there's a majority justice system. And people may not want to hear that answer, but the data supports it and this work supports it.
Well, if we're going to trot that out there as fact, data-supported fact, we darn well better be looking for how do we fix that. We better be talking about that tonight. But you happen to mention public defender. And look in my front row. Sean McNulty is the chief public defender for the Legal Aid Society. You go into the jail on a regular basis. While we wrestle with the challenges facing our community out here, too many people do just sit in jail. They're sitting there tonight. Some just flat out can't make bail, okay? Others, as the commissioner has indicated, can't afford privately funded legal representation. As we have revisited jails and justice in Lucas County, we have embarked on a coordinated strategy, which you're going to hear about here tonight. And this is the county's population review team. Check this out. The population review team conducts a weekly overview of the pre-trial jail population. Again, the people in jail awaiting trial. Looking for what?
Let me start by saying this. We talk about questions that we're asking about the system and about why there is perceived inequity or perhaps inequity in what's happening. And one of the questions that kind of gave rise to the population review team is when I was contacted by a number of people, including judges, asking, is there a way that we could safely reduce the jail population? This was pre-MacArthur. And I said, I don't know. I'd need to know who is in the jail, why are they there? And they were able to generate a report for me so I could actually review those cases. And what I saw is there was a lot of people that were in the jail for low-level, nonviolent, no victim cases that were waiting for long periods of time, often because they had failed to appear previously and were being held. I could also see that the types of cases we were seeing, I could give a pretty good guess on what the likely outcome would be on the case, okay? And rather than having people languishing in jail And the research will show you that even 2 to 3 days being in the jail can greatly destabilize your life, because you may be losing jobs, you may be losing your housing, your children may be taken away. There's a lot of negative consequences that can come from being in the jail, even for a short period of time. So we wanted to see, are there ways that we can get a team of people together to review individuals in the jail and see if we can do something different, rather than letting them sit there and potentially have their lives destabilized. So we were looking at the ability to modify bonds and to give less restrictive alternatives to housing someone at the jail. And we were also looking to see if we could more efficiently expedite the resolution of cases through diversion, dismissals, plea agreements, things of that nature. So the weekly team came together and analyzed specific categories of individuals at the jail, looking for those non-victim, low-level, nonviolent cases to see if we could do something different now in 3 days rather than in 3 weeks or 6 weeks in the jail.
The majority of the people sitting in jail in a pretrial situation, is the majority nonviolent charges?
I wouldn't say that. There's several categories, and we have a report that gets generated every week. It breaks it down by, many different things, including violent offenses, nonviolent offenses, misdemeanors, felonies. So there's lots of ways that we categorize it and then look through it. But we want to pair out, victim cases. We don't want to be taking a look at those. Violent cases are cases we're likely not going to be reviewing as well. But the lower level things, that's what we wanted to take a look at. And 9 years ago, we were looking at 15 to 20 cases weekly where people had those types of cases, and we were addressing those earlier and better.
You're in the jail all the time?
My office is, yes.
Your office, I get that. So you would agree or disagree with the contention that we heard from a county commissioner that there are two systems of justice?
I think there's more than two systems of justice, because I think it can be inequities that could be based on race and ethnicity, but poverty is absolutely correlated to disparate outcomes for individuals. And so when you talked about people in the jail who couldn't afford to post their bond, right, they may have the exact same charges as other individuals, they may have the exact same history, and yet they're having a more negative outcome because they didn't have the ability to post their bond. So now you're letting financial situations also determine the outcomes of individuals.
But
that is not a just system.
That is not a just system. Thank you for that. There's one person on this panel who hasn't been heard from yet, and I'm not letting him off the hook. But first, Tamika Rushing spoke with us. Tamika Rushing helps educate and assist people with getting their basic needs met. She talked with us. She seems to think that incarceration often just compounds problems. And she also is going to take us here to an issue that we want to explore with our panel next. So take a look.
Drug abuse, drug trafficking, domestic violence. If the parents are experiencing barriers, definitely the child is experiencing barriers as well. And even at a more of a magnitude of a level, next thing you know, you have a family that you have to address recidivism for in many different ways, whether it's incarceration and whether it's in thinking. Mental health is very important. If drug abuse is a coping mechanism, that's an action item for mental health to address. Incarcerating someone is only going to make it a little bit more complicated for them. Actually, it's going to compound. Oftentimes, men cannot get direct benefits, which is a barrier. They can't go to Jobs and Family Services and apply for benefits if they don't have a child in the home. Can it happen? Yes, but it's on a case-by-case basis. So first and foremost, they don't have the ability to address their mental issues because they don't have the resources to do it. Women typically have the work-ready mindset that I'm just gonna go out and work and I'm a mask it. I'm a drug abuse, I'm gonna sell my body, I'm a strip, I'm gonna do all these things that's going to stop me from thinking about what I'm actually dealing with. The bottom line of that, though, is the child that's at home is being most impacted because none of their mental issues are being dealt with. What's missing is the opportunity to have those mental health services at your exposure for free. Our overarching goal for a community is to see it thrive. At least that's what it should be. The onus is on the community as a whole. So you definitely need housing. You definitely need education. You definitely need income supports. And by all means, you need mental health.
Going back to 2014, when this thing started, halfway through that year, 2/3 of people in custody, 67%, had received services from the Lucas County Mental Health and Recovery Services Board at some time in their lives. Scott Sylak is here. He is the executive director of that board. So how big a concern was it of yours when you saw so many people being jailed really for actions that resulted from illness, mental illness?
It was a huge concern for us. Obviously, we want to address the racial inequities in our community. We also want to reduce the impact of incarceration that can have on families. But it's important to note that individuals with behavioral health disorders, particularly mental health disorders, are more likely to be victims of crime than criminals. Let's start there. Be perpetrators. Substance use, on the other hand, is highly correlated with criminal activity. Nonetheless, you pick up a charge, you have it on your resume, so to speak, and it's more difficult to get the housing, it's more difficult to get the employment, it's more difficult to succeed in school. Access to care is important in our community. Where are those pockets of neighborhoods that don't have access to care, and how do we get those access to care? Medicaid expansion took away some of the barriers to treatment services that the individual on the film spoke about with single males, right? We have over 70 providers in Lucas County willing and able to help individuals. Now, do those people that are willing to help individuals look like the individuals that might be coming through that door? Not always, most cases not. Have they shared cultural experiences? No, they haven't in most cases. So there's a lot of work to do in the community to ensure that the outcomes that white people see in treatment, African Americans and Latinos experience that same level of success.
Okay, I want to make something really, really clear. Scott Sylak, believe me, will have you know, having mental illness does not make you a criminal. Okay? Mental illness is not a precursor to criminal behavior. But people with mental illness do commit crimes, as do people who don't have mental illness, correct?
Correct.
You and I would also agree that as we go through life, we may say, hey, that would be, can't do that, that would be on the wrong side of the law, that would get me in trouble, my reputation to be shot, it would cost me money, so that pulls us back. There are people who don't see that line, or that line is way too blurry.
Absolutely. And, we're promoting this idea called compassionate accountability.
Go there. I want to hear
right?
this.
So just because you have a mental illness or a substance use does not necessarily mean that you should not be held accountable, but there are differing levels of accountability. Obviously, if there's a victim of a crime, if there's a violent offense, something that is really against the community norms, then you may need a level of incarceration. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you should go without treatment while that's occurring, because we know 99% of the people that go in, 100% probably of the people that go into a jail are coming back out into our community, and we need them to be a part of our community. So we need accessible health care, we need accessible education, we need accessible behavioral health care.
Is a person with mental illness charged, are they ever better off for sitting in a jail?
I would say vast majority of people, no.
Do we have the resources in our community if people were willing to seek those? And then, of course, my follow-up is going to be, what do you do when people don't want to seek those?
So, there's an individual, I believe that there's adequate resources in our community. Is it everything that everybody would always want? No. Now, let's face it, housing is always going to be an issue. But mental health services, substance use services, we are blessed with very qualified providers in our community. However, your issue becomes what individuals have free will, right? I can't force somebody into treatment. Judges have a difficult time forcing people into treatment. They can order it, but that doesn't necessarily mean, that the person will show up and that whole next cycle. It's incumbent upon service providers that are in our system to do the very best to engage people productively, because I believe change happens within the context of a relationship, and you never know where that relationship is going to develop. So even if it's the receptionist as you walk in the door, greeting them with a smile and welcome them as a guest, that might be enough to keep that person there the next day, and next day, and next day. And if they're there long enough, they're going to get better.
Jason, let's get some more questions from our viewers.
Yeah, Jerry, we have a couple more questions on race, and I'm going to ask both of them if that's okay. The first one is the reasons of minority performing more crime because of low income, prejudice of police, or different reasons. And then the second question is, the question says, multiple studies show the criminal justice system is not racist. Why not admit this forum is intended to find a scapegoat? Put otherwise, to reach race proportionality in jail, do we need more white people committing more crimes, violent crimes, and gun crimes?
Chief, how would you?
Did that question come from this audience?
The second question.
No. Malcolm, please, let's go. We appreciate, we're going to treat, and by the way, every question we get tonight will get an answer, whether it's on this town hall. We have some limitations on time. I can guarantee you all of your questions will be answered. Malcolm.
First, I don't think Chief is interested in having more white people commit crimes. Just making sure we're good? Okay, all right. So it is all of the above when we talk about factors that inform why people choose to make those decisions or why they make those decisions. I continue to return to the idea of, yes, it is an individual decision, but you're also situated within a community. You're also situated within policy, right? And those sorts of things are things that inform how the justice system works differently for black and brown folks versus elsewhere. 13th Amendment exists. It happened right after the end of slavery. Guess what? We still have the same ratio. It might be even worse, right? Like the reality is we cannot talk about this issue right now without speaking to the broader issue that has existed within this country for 400 years. So it's all of the above, but it's also, we have to truly grapple with and understand what these issues are and how they've impacted the black and brown community, again, over time.
I want to hear
you look at the city of Toledo, we have some of the most concentrated poverty in this country.
Yep.
And it is in the black and brown neighborhoods. It's in the black neighborhoods, excuse me. And it's also, again, in the neighborhoods that were bisected by highways, that were, invested in by federal government, that were bisected by redlining, that was a collection of issues that came from, it's a complex issue, but the reality is we do know where the situation sits.
Anybody on this panel want to weigh in on that? Go ahead, Commissioner.
Real quick, I think all he said was true. All the questions were asked were true. It's multi-level. There's one thing we haven't talked about yet, and that's trauma. And that leads into mental health and behavior. And when you look in the black community and the poverty community, that trauma is now generational. And trauma can be passed from one generation to another inherently. It's almost genetic. People that experience trauma and poverty have less resources, sometimes react rather than respond, and it's just part of where they have been and where they have come through. So the key is not arresting more white people, believe me. And the real truth at the end of the MacArthur thing, we haven't really changed the disparity in the jail. It's lesser number. Maybe it's not a disparity of 600, but maybe we got 400, but that disparity of who's arrested and who's not, we have not fixed that yet after 5 years of trying.
Molly, do you want to weigh in on that?
In response to the scapegoat, I think this process has really been about learning what the drivers of our jail population are, and we're not trying to pick a scapegoat saying this is why we have disparities in the jail. I think it's a culmination of multiple factors, and it's bigger than just the criminal justice system, as Malcolm has identified. If we really want to address racial and ethnic disparities, we need to start with the neighborhoods. We need to start with family structures. We need to address poverty. There's studies that show Students who have less structured households are more likely to receive suspensions at school, which then leads to your involvement in the juvenile justice system. This is way bigger than just the criminal justice system, and we really do need the community to help us address the disparities in the criminal justice system.
Can I just
Please.
piggyback to, I mean, we've heard this said 5 different ways. I'm going to say it a 6th way. But the questions we ask are important. And the questions that we're asking, when we say things like, how do you safely reduce the jail population? That is one tiny part of the criminal justice system. That is one tiny part of just society, right? If we ask a question like, how do we make it less likely that somebody enters or returns to the criminal justice system? That's a broader question, but that's still not the right question either. We really want to be asking, how can we support people so that they can be successful, however they define success? And the reality is we can do a much better job by looking upstream, supporting people, and even where there is excellent support, which I believe also in the behavioral health system, there's a lot of great pieces, but it's difficult to navigate. It's difficult to navigate for people like professionals that do this every day. And so if you have an individual in the community who is trying to navigate their way through it, it's even more difficult. So it's not just resources, it's not just funding, it's also helping that navigation so people can succeed.
Holly Matthews.
And one more thing to add to the discussion on trauma, if you look at our jail population, 90 to 95% of individuals that are in jail have a history of abuse and have a history of trauma. So if we do not address trauma in the past, we're not going to move forward and we're not going to be able to adequately help individuals.
Bears out exactly what the commissioner was saying earlier. Jason, let's move, since we've had so many questions from our viewers, we're going to try to get to them.
How long will Save Our City be around?
It's Save Our Community is the name of the program. It's a community violence intervention. The goal of that intervention is to work with those that are most at risk of shooting or being shot on any given day, and to provide intensive wraparound support, service navigation, and also to provide mediation and to reduce the amount of conflicts that spill over. We know that there's a network of violence, of pain, that tends to transmit similar to a disease. So the goal of a CVI program like Save Our Community is to disrupt the transmission of violence. And I want it to be around. I want it to be the most standardized part of an ecosystem, of an approach to address this issue. The reality is it is far, far, far less expensive to stop people from being shot than it is to work with people that have already been shot.
Program's been here for a while. Is it working? Can we support statistically that it's working?
Yes, yes. In the target neighborhoods that they work in, the number of shootings that have occurred have gone down. In the schools that they've just started to work in, they've been able to respond to a number of incidents. There are 24 people on the caseload, and it's only been around for, I think, 3 months. We can absolutely show success. What I will also say is that this is 2 years into a willingness to invest in a program that has been proven to be effective in other contexts across the country for more than 20 years, right? So we're 2 years into this. We actually need time. And the reality is we cost less than it does to collect the leaves every year, right? So do we want to collect leaves? Do we want to reduce the amount of people that are being shot? I think we can actually do both. I think it's possible, right? And again, when you think about the cost of incarceration, once someone has chose to make that decision, it far outweighs the cost of the actual program. So it's really up to the community. It's up to you all if we decide to continue to exist, but we know it works. It's a hell of a lot easier to not get shot than it is to get shot. So,
Jason.
When will sufficient and consistent funding be offered to grassroots organizations that are currently addressing significant issues such as youth violence, poverty, law, education, job training, and job attainment?
It's absolutely right. It's going to take significant community investment to work upstream. MacArthur money is over. We did what we did with what we got, and it is borne fruit. That doesn't mean the work quits. The community engagement, to me, as I've said from the beginning, continues and has to be amplified. County commissioners generally, and we will again this year, have $1.5 million, and we've used some MacArthur money to invest directly into small community groups. And we're going to continue to do that. We're hoping the city will match us on that. And I understand that's only amount, but here's what we found. If you target money to the right community places, a small amount of money, everybody doesn't need $1 million. Some of these groups just need $25,000, $30,000, $40,000 to get them working. The bigger organizations like Pathways and others takes more money. We are committed as commissioners to continuous stream of investment in that area.
We have another panel standing by. The questions have been great. What I would like to do is to hear from each of you as we summarize this panel, because I heard a lot about we need to, and we do need to do something. But who is the we? What are we going to do? What is the something? I heard how can we support people is the question that we should be asking more than criminal. So could we pass the mic around and everybody give me an action step, something that we can follow, because we're going to follow. If these other areas are out there in need of addressing, who can we be watching? Whose feet can we hold to the fire? What should we be doing? Each of you for less than a minute, please. Go ahead, start us off.
All right, first action step. I think the key is to be committed. Commit to doing something in your community. It can be something small, it can be something big, but commit to do something.
All right, Sean McNulty.
I'm very proud that my office has taken a more holistic approach to representing our clients. So we are looking into challenges and hurdles that individuals have, and then we are getting to know the client. We're advocating better because we know them differently, and we, I believe, are getting better outcomes on cases. That's great. However, we need to do things like we said upstream. One suggestion that I have is to have, call it a campus, or convert an unused mall, or whatever the situation is, and have all of the service providers that provide behavioral health and other services in the community in one location. Because for people to try to navigate for whatever their variety of needs are is very, very difficult.
You can get lost in the system.
That model can work. You can come to one place and address all the issues.
Carol Contrada, give me an action step.
I would say more forums like this, and don't be afraid to go. Go to your neighborhood library, go to neighborhood churches, and sit and listen to what people in the neighborhoods are saying. And the commissioners and other providers need to take a chance on some really good ideas that come from the person next door, the person in your parish, the person in your church. Listen and respond. This is
listening is one thing, then taking
and
action.
respond
Scott,
and
Sylak,
bring
I need
those
to hear from
ideas
you.
forward.
Scott.
Action step for our providers in our system is to continue to work to assure accessibility and that access that Sean and Commissioner Contrada talked about, making sure that people have access to the care that they need in the time frame they need it by the individuals that look and sound and have experienced the same and similar life experiences so that they can get the best care that they can, that they're entitled to.
Just talk to your neighbors, be willing to learn, and do some perspective taking on what works and what doesn't.
We need to continue to listen in the community and then fund those programs. We need to continue to empower the people who are doing the work, and that's Tina Butts at the movement, that's other people in the community. They're the real doers. We got to get behind them. That's our action step.
Okay, we have, by the way, this program is also not only streaming live, we're recording it, which means we can revisit all of these answers and what progress we have or have not made. You are watching a town hall meeting, Rethinking Jails and Justice, a production of WGTE Public Media in collaboration with the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Safety and Justice Challenge. Now, the effort both locally and nationally to reduce jail population stresses doing so safely. But can that be done? Toledo's police chief, the city's mayor, an appellate court judge who's spent years on this issue, a Muni court judge who's also spent years, and others join us right here next. But right now, more of what people are telling us on issues of crime and jails and, yes, justice. Sean Mahone, Sr., he operates something, he's been called a boot camp, but it's a tough love approach with kids, trying to keep them from heading down the wrong path. So I want to hear from his opinions on systemic racism, jails as punishment, and even our city's political leaders. Take a look.
Nothing changes if nothing changes. So if we can work together and come up with a collaborative solution, I believe that we can head in the right direction. It comes from the top down. So there has to be something in place in our city government which allows there to be with our local police departments. There has to be a form of rehabilitation, in those institutions, and helping the person heal from the inside out, and giving them an opportunity to know that there's hope. Then we can possibly do a greater work. There's no justice when it's just us, and unfortunately, we find that disproportionately, African Americans are more likely to be incarcerated. African Americans are more likely that's going to commit crimes, and the data shows that. The end goal for the system is, instead of incarcerating people, how do we reduce the recidivism rate to keep individuals out of jail and making sure that they get the proper services that they need, regards to if it's behavior modification or behavior health. And so when you're dealing with systemic racism, you're dealing with a system that people that don't look like us are controlling what needs to be done, which is unfair to the people of color that don't get the opportunity to get the services and the help that they need. And so it becomes that continuous cycle on not really educating individuals and helping them understand the mistakes that they made. Is about punishment, especially, again, when we go back to being disproportionate against minorities. That's what the system is built and designed for, and that's the fight that we have to fight. You have to have conversations, and when I say conversations, I'm talking about having healthy conversations. There has to be an accountability on those who are in leadership that is in the criminal justice system in regards to our local courts and local jails. And there has to be an accountability of those who are in position to even find out if those individuals are the right people to be in those positions.
So as we talk about safely reducing jail populations, again, safely, let's consider who sends people to jail in the first place. Toledo Police Chief Michael Troendle is here, and I thank you, Chief, for being here. Seems there's always a uniform involved, so who decides in those tough moments, often emotionally filled moments, who decides who goes to jail?
Well, the initial who decides who gets booked, which is the process to start the jail, I guess would be the responding officer at the scene. I'd say it's more than just the officer. It's also the suspect or the person being arrested. It's their actions, their conduct, what has happened that may have forced the hand of an officer to arrest them.
As I've studied this, I have learned how the words deflection and diversion are used, and it's extremely critical. That sounds right now a little inside baseball. Stay with me. We'll understand all of this. Deflection comes before the arrest. That would involve your officers. It means what, and do we use it?
So yes, I would say our officers are very good at not booking offenders. So, in the city of Toledo Police Department, we've been using what we call summons for a long time. People that have warrants that are nonviolent, that don't pose a risk to the community, our officers are summoning them instead of booking them into the jail. They're using all-purpose citations. Roughly only 40% of those arrested actually get booked into the jail. There's also, when you look at different they're going to hospitals, to the Zeph Center, depending on what's happening at the scene. So you have to realize an officer at 3 o'clock in the morning, what they're looking to do is solve the problem they've been dispatched to. They're trying to figure out a way to make sure they're not called back there, make sure that whatever the reason they're called there doesn't continue to happen and we continue to have somebody being victimized.
We have some of our viewers who've weighed in with some questions involving our police department.
Yeah, a couple of questions here. The first one, how do we get back to incorporating community policing as a means of getting more buy-in to the incorporation of police in the community, being on the same side without the community feeling They want the community to feel heard and supported. And then the second question says, it's not what the police said, it's how they said it. If I can't trust police, how can we revamp hope in our city?
So take the community policing question first, and as the police department, we have a lot of officers that are dedicated to the community policing concept, if you will, that are constantly being that conduit between our community and our officers, attending the groups, the large meetings and neighborhood associations, trying to get our residents, our community to work with our officers. But that's not it. Our officers on a daily basis, every officer, every citizen contact is an opportunity for community policing. It's an opportunity for us to bridge that gap, if you will. And take, for instance, this year, we've made or I guess 2023, a concerted effort to get our officers out on foot in neighborhoods and actually learning the residents and the neighborhood and being available to talk to them and kind of, make that existence better.
Those two things are absolutely intertwined, because when you talk about trust, which was the second question there, the police officers in Toledo that I talk with on an ongoing basis and covered for too many years will tell me that years ago they would pull into a neighborhood and people would come out to talk to them. They pull into some neighborhoods now and everybody goes that direction. That is trust that somehow over years has been broken and needs to be reestablished. We'll come back to that because I want to get other people involved. Appellate judge, former common pleas judge, Gene Zmuda, has doggedly followed the efforts of the Safety and Justice Challenge. In fact, he's led the efforts many, many times. We spoke recently about the criminal justice system, and his honor admonished me right away. Anderson, what you're talking about is an oxymoron. Certainly the criminal justice system is not a monolithic structure in your mind.
Well, wasn't.
Wasn't. This is where we're going.
Okay, and I bring perspective about the success of the MacArthur Foundation and why it is so successful here in Lucas County. Because we have the closest thing to a true system where you have the disparate parts. You have the police, you have the courts, you have the administration or the commissioners working together to recognize we only have one criminal justice system. We each have our component parts, what we're required to do, and how does what we do as judges impact what they do in the arresting and the processing of cases, the lawyers who represent defendants, the probation departments, and the post-conviction work that people like Bud have to do. To understand the interplay or the interconnectedness amongst these various parts was a crucial.
But this didn't exist before this effort.
It did not, because
people out there, we have people watching all over the state, all over the country. We are on the internet after all. You're gonna tell me that if they were like us, they did not have criminal justice the way we do.
It didn't exist here, it does now. And I can tell you, having traveled all over the country and in Ohio, talking about this, it presently doesn't exist all over the place, okay? But you don't have the reduction and therefore the improvement in justice, getting back to that first question, right? Mm-hmm. We do have real justice here as a consequence of recognizing the systemic approach to why people are being arrested and what happens to them once they are arrested.
Tell me about something that has been part of this, something called PSA. It's supposed to help you. Well, you're the appellate judge now, but help judges make release and detention decisions based on risk assessment.
You want me to do it, you want Tim to do it?
I would.
We can both do it, but he's presently doing it.
Kuhlman is doing it right now. Thank you, over Minicore. Go.
So what we found, when I graduated from law school in '91, we didn't study anything. We anecdotally said, this makes sense, let's do it, and we didn't know if it worked or not. Now we study it. So what the PSA court did, it's an Arnold Foundation project, they looked at 1 million cases that occurred, and they Monday morning quarterbacked 1 million cases and found out there were certain risk factors. Mm-hmm. And with some of the people, they didn't commit new crimes and they showed up for a court, and other people committed new crimes, new violent crimes, didn't show up for court. So they just measured it over 1 million cases, and we created an algorithm, and so we now have this PSA court that gives people either a low risk score or a high risk score. If you're high risk, we tend to keep you in jail. If you're low risk, we release you from jail. It is not based on the charge. So in other words, the charge that you are charged with and not convicted of isn't what we set the bond on. What people like to say is, based on the crime he committed, you can't let him out of jail. What that means is, based on the crime you're guilty of, we're going to punish you with the bond. We don't want to do that because, as you said earlier, people are presumed innocent until they're proven guilty. So we use the risk level and use a low risk level to release people.
Doesn't the vast majority of Lucas County's pre-trial population qualify for administrative release, say using electronic monitoring?
I would say yes, that's true, and we release most people.
Okay. Get back over to Jason if we can.
Yes, so a couple questions here. Isn't it the case that everyone in jail is traumatized because incarceration is inherently traumatic because our jail in particular is overcrowded? And what's being done this is being done routinely because strip searches can be experienced as sexual trauma. And then the second question is, what's the status of building the new jail for Lucas County? What size is projected for the new jail at this point?
As far as dealing with trauma and coming into institutions and stuff, unfortunately, part of safety is making sure everybody's going to be safe. So sadly, we still have to do strip searches and things like that because people hide things on their bodies. However, the important part is then in a place like mine, we have programming to deal with the trauma, the issues that people have had, connect them to the community counseling, like Scott was talking about, resources in the mental health areas or areas where people have maybe coming in after having been sexually abused, those types of things. We evaluate for what we call Prison Rape Elimination Act, right? We look, is somebody potentially a victim, is somebody potentially a predator? How do we keep people safe? So there's a lot that goes on in dealing with those types of issues when somebody's incarcerated in a facility.
By the way, that is Bud Height, the Executive Director of the Lucas County Correctional Treatment Center. Bud, good to have you along. Being in Toledo, Mayor Wade Kapszukiewicz' mind, I think, would be a fascinating adventure. But when you run a city our size, Mayor, the safety of our people, I'm guessing, is a thought that has to pop in there, I'm guessing, on a daily basis. And you say to many people, let's call them voters, the key to safety is to, quote, lock them up and throw away the key. That's a significant viewpoint to your way of thinking?
I have never said that. Is that
you tell me that you believe over a third of the people you encounter believe just that, and that third may be a conservative number.
Absolutely, and I think when we prepared for this session, the panelists agreed with that assessment. So just so the panel understands, the notion of locking them up and throwing away the key is not something I believe in, but it is my sense, and I think there's general consensus among the panelists. And probably a third of Toledoans believe that, if not more. So yes, that is a perception that many people have.
So how do you think that has impacted what we're trying to do here? Is that calling anybody off of the cause here?
No. I see where you're headed. Look, we live in a very ideological time. Unfortunately, we live in a moment right now. It hasn't always been this way. But right now, we live in an us, them, blue state, red state world. And folks look through the lens of their own ideology when they analyze this. Even I got a snicker, I was off stage, but the question about Save Our Communities that came up and the budget impact of it. We should justify every expenditure we make, but the Save Our Communities budget is roughly $1 million. Chief will tell you we spend $100 million on policing. So I would love to see the same amount of scrutiny on everything that we spend 1/100th of 1% on in city government. The fact of the matter is, the attack on Save Our Community is an ideological attack. It comes from a perspective, whether it's a third or 40% or whatever, of that folks that say, it's feel-goody, the MacArthur grant, lock them up and throw away the key. Just because there's a sentiment out there that believes that doesn't mean it's the right thing to do. And it occasionally requires risky decisions. Building a new jail is necessary, but not popular. The Save Our Communities program, anytime something is new, it's maybe not popular.
I love the results thus far. Homicides in Toledo last year were down 31%. Shootings were down 26%. Now, nationally, violent crime is going down.
But not that much.
The national average last year was about 10%. We're doing 3 times better than the rest of the country.
Why?
Sometimes you have to go against the grain of popular will if you're prepared to talk about the results. I'm proud of our results despite of the work we still have to do. But these results might not have happened had we listened to the, I don't know if it's a third or a quarter or whatever it is, but they lock them up and throw them.
Well, I realize that many people these days don't want to get bogged down in things like facts or truth. All right?
Hear, hear.
But the facts absolutely don't support the concern that people released from custody while awaiting trial commit other crimes. So isn't leadership about confronting fallacies with facts?
Yes, and just speaking for myself, I believe we have confronted fallacies head on, and now we are reaping at least the early parts of some positive results to vouch for it. I agree with you. The alternative is to keep on doing the same thing we've always been doing. Detroit. What's our perception when we hear the word Detroit in the context of safety?
It means I'm glad I'm in Toledo.
Okay. Last year, there were fewer homicides in the city of Detroit since 1966. I was born in 1972.
Kid.
Good luck anyone in this audience or watching who knows that factoid.
Yeah.
There's perception and there's reality, and sometimes we are so emotional on this subject that we just don't want to believe that homicides in Toledo are down by 31%, that shootings are down by 26%. I'm going to keep saying it, but emotionally it doesn't always get through.
You're just not going to keep saying it right now because Jason has.
We are talking today about racial inequalities, but most of the panelists are white. What message does that send to the audience?
Just so you know, in our preparation for being here tonight, as we discuss things, one of the moderators' point was, considering we're talking about racial and ethnic disparities and reducing those, everybody I'm talked to, well, Malcolm, everybody else I've talked to on this panel is white. Okay.
Well, I might simply say, not to defend, for 2/3 of the people on this panel are elected officials. To some extent, the voters had a say in who's up here, and I don't know who decided to put a bunch of elected officials up here, but the voters decided to elect the folks up here.
We have more questions. Let's go.
Can there be a living wage for a limited amount of time with stipulations to prevent relapse into criminal acts or a poverty mindset?
Living wage. I think that's a really good question, and I think that that's something that absolutely we should explore. And how we explore that is really diving deep into that of what is that living wage. Where is that living wage? Is that living wage on LaGrange Street? Or as Commissioner Gerken said earlier, the living wage on, he wasn't talking about living wage, but on River Road. So yeah, I think that's a conversation, but you're really diving deep into that and going to the communities and having those conversations about what is that true living wage amount that needs to be had. Because I could think about, if I'm talking to folks on Warsaw Street, as I often refer to, though, is they really have a lot of the answers, but we have to be willing to go and listen to what those answers are and then going and implementing those. And again, back to Commissioner Gerken talked about the community funding, is funding those community organizations, because let's face it, they have the relationships in the communities. They understand the communities. And what we have to be is better listeners and implementation in a short amount of time and not take a lot of time on debating the question, but it's going to finding how we're going to solve the problem.
Jason, I'm back to you in just a moment. I want to get a couple people involved here on some issues that have been part of this effort over the past several years. Remember I mentioned earlier deflection, and diversion, deflection, we put the police officers' ways before the arrest. Diversion. Have you heard about this? It seems to me when I was covering the news, somebody who was caught, accused of doing something, and they would be offered a diversion program. And if they would take this coursework over here, this diversion program, they could most likely have the charges erased. And I found that it seemed to me, Your Honor, that most of the people who were offered diversion had good attorneys and were lighter complected. I know that part of this effort locally has been to expand the diversion program with the focus on the underserved. Can you go with that, please?
Yes, we created a new diversion program in connection with the Safety and Justice Challenge, and specifically we recognize that blacks are overrepresented in every single part of criminal justice except diversion, where they are dramatically underrepresented. And when we looked at the jail population, there were
Can you hold that for a second?
Yes.
Why would that be? Why would they have been underserved before? Go.
It's restitution.
I'm gonna get you
Because,
back. No, go.
because there was an economic factor. They were not allowed in the program unless they paid the cost of the diversion program. And therefore, they were prohibited, because they're poor, to participate in the program. That's what we found initially.
And that would tend to reinforce my just perception that this usually went to people who had means. I want to get you back because you've taken it now to people who don't have means. Go. Thank you for the interruption.
So what we wanted to make sure of was we were addressing racial and ethnic disparities. When we looked at the jail and we looked at the specific numbers, there were 3 charges where blacks were more overrepresented than most. And that was resisting arrest, obstructing official business, and low-level drug charges, primarily marijuana or some paraphernalia. And we thought if we did something to address those, we could do something about the racial disparity. And those happen to be nonviolent, non-victim cases where we tend to have a little bit more leeway. And we developed a 3.5-hour diversion program based on the concept of procedural fairness. And we had professional help to develop this curriculum, Sean McNulty, and some others, and Lisa Falgiano from our court. We worked with CCI to do this. And that particular program, over its, I believe, 6 years now, the percentage of African Americans in that program is 66%. So blacks are overrepresented in that diversion program. I'm not aware of another diversion program in the country where that is the case.
And that has been the result of this effort.
Yes.
Nationally, very few defendants get trials. They take plea deals. The question is, what percentage of convictions in Lucas County are reached without trial, and what measures, if any, are in place to limit the differences between sentences offered with plea deals and those imposed after conviction at trial, and to ensure that defense counsel are able to mount a full defense for every client in order to ensure that innocent defendants are not pressured into pleading guilty?
So, great questions. They were like, and you don't have enough time because I could spend the rest of the program talking about all of these, as you well know.
Again, no, you can't. But go. That was worth it.
Okay. It actually highlights one of the concerns, but it also illustrates one of the things we were able to establish with MacArthur.
Yeah.
And that is, as it relates to disparity, racial disparity, once in the system, all right, the system in Lucas County, as cases are processed, does not demonstrate any disparity as to whether or not the defendant who is being processed is white or black, all right? So the disparity that exists, and I'm not challenging that, is the disparity on the upshot, the input, the coming into the system. So when Commissioner Gerken and when the police chief, when people talk about upstream, how do we prevent them from coming into the system? That's the true focus because the good news for our society is there's no disparity in how they're being treated once they're in the system, all right? There's no data that can establish that African American defendants are maltreated more or mistreated at all, quite frankly, because they're African American and they're not white, all right? Now, the issue, to answer your question, is the education of lawyers is paramount. And one of the unknown or silent issues that is percolating and continues to rise is the lack of qualified attorneys who would represent indigent defendants in our community. It's an issue that we're experiencing presently, but it's an issue that's all courts all across this country are facing. Last year, we had 3 public defenders retire from our system. 140 years of experience retired. They're replaced by younger lawyers, all right? But you lose that essence, right? You lose that ability, that 140 years of being in the trenches and understanding what it means to represent individuals is gone, all right? It's paramount that we figure out mechanisms and methods of improving who is going to represent the indigent defendants, because we live in a society, thank God, in which anyone who can't afford one shall be appointed counsel, and that there's a presumption that that counsel that is being afforded them is competent. And that's the answer to your question. The competent counsel will make sure that that's a fair disposition of a case.
We can follow up on that, but right now, Bud Hite jumped in earlier at a point on an issue. As Lucas County's Safety and Justice Challenge is committed to implementing successful alternatives to incarceration, it had to consider probation practices, and here's why. One report says something like 32%, which is roughly a third of the populations at the Correction Center of Northwest Ohio, are there for probation violations. And again, we hear, well, they got out and they didn't live up to the rules. Stay with me. It turns out a decent chunk of people on probation are under supervision in more than one jurisdiction. There are something like 5 independent probation authorities around Lucas County. And it's pointed out to me, well, where was the original charge? If it's Sylvania Court, you saw Judge so-and-so. Maumee, you saw Judge so-and-so. Toledo Municipal Court. So you had all this going on, which turned out to be a recipe for probation violations, which means reincarceration. Enter Bud Hite, Executive Director of the Lucas County Correctional Treatment Center. The solution that you brought about and how it's working.
Well, it's working great now, right?
Which is what?
Which is we now, all 5 probation departments for all the courts in Lucas County talk. We talk regularly. We share information. We share urine screen tests. We do all the things that weren't getting done before. We don't have people walking around the city with an ankle monitor on the left leg for this court and an ankle monitor on the right leg for this court. It's really absurd, because what happens when you split somebody like that? They're only going to fail. It's a natural setup for failure. It makes no sense, right? So we had to fix the things that didn't make sense. We had to start seeing the individual for who they are, and really what was most important is we started not violating people because everybody's the same. You talked about the human versus the number at the beginning, right? When you treat everybody the same, they're a number. When you treat everybody individually, you're now seeing the human being, and that's how you help somebody change. They might be a risk to the community at some point to reoffend, but the reality is what is that person's need? How do we get them to what they need to change? How do we help them get reconnected to their family, whatever the case would be? That's what we did as a system. The probation departments now, we want to make sure that we do not set people up for failure. And that's what happens.
This was a tweaking, and more than a tweaking, of the system. So tonight we have heard both system change and the need for community change. More questions from Jason.
Multi-questions here. So this is saying that with police chases, by the time officers have made the stop, the driver's agitated and no longer thinking objectively. This is a point where police aggression and brutality can happen, and suffice it to say, any racial inclinations come to light. The question is, have the police lost the mindset of community policing? Are police officers seeing people as nothing more than objects? And then a second part has to do with the homeless population, saying, are officers trained on what services are out there when they encounter a homeless person, and are they trying to avoid angry confrontations and escalations? And I hope a college education is still a requirement.
So there's a lot to unpack there. So I will tell you that our officers are trained in a multitude of things, including crisis intervention training, which leads towards the homeless and dealing with people that may have mental health concerns, and learning how to de-escalate those and take them to the appropriate place to get them help. And as far as our officers treating our community or our suspects as objects, I would vehemently oppose that whole concept. Our officers are excellent officers, and they're very empathetic, and every day I have something cross my desk that talks about our officers going above and beyond to help an individual. One of the last things our officers want to do is arrest somebody or do something that's going to harm a family, but unfortunately there's a lot of different charges out there that mandate our officers arrest them. So the fact of the matter is our officers are out there trying to make their community better.
Yes, real quickly to the mayor, then I want to get Commissioner Sobecki involved.
Just to follow up on that point, I think it's important that Toledoans know this. The state of Ohio reimburses cities for 1 year of training, academy training, for de-escalation techniques, sensitivity, use of force, all those things. Everything that the chief just alluded to, that the question alluded to, the state of Ohio will reimburse cities to teach that in the academy. The city of Toledo goes to the expense of paying for and requiring that its officers get those trainings every year. So whether you are a rookie or a 40-year vet, you get trained up every year on the latest when it comes to use of force, de-escalation, et cetera. Doesn't mean human beings always get it right, but citizens should know that we care enough about this that we go well above and beyond.
Not one and done,
what this
it's
right.
a recurring. Okay, she, I think, has a microphone. Well, I wanted to get Commissioner Lisa Sobecki, who joined us earlier, has spent her recent years representing Toledo down in the state legislature. Fortunately, she was able to escape, and...
Thank you, voters.
Yeah, thank you, voters. Now he looks good at me. Your concerns on criminal justice, and I want to get this in even though it's going in a little different direction, but you spoke to this, starts with kids.
Absolutely, and thank you, Jerry. And first of all, I want to thank WDTE for doing this for our community, because I think this is a very important conversation we had. The mayor previously talked about the decline in numbers, but what we haven't talked about is the 31% of increase in our juveniles that were shot last year. And so we're talking about a safety justice challenge. So everyone that's here today is what we need to do is, what I think is start looking at our juvenile courts, which they're doing amazing work. Our adult courts are doing amazing work. Both sides have torn down a lot of barriers, but what we need to do now is start looking and putting this together and sharing the information from the juvenile courts to the adult courts, and how we're going to be able to tackle this issue that we have now. 31% increase last year of our kids that are shot. Homicides, think about that. We've not seen numbers like that for a long time, and these are our kids. But this is affecting our schools, this is affecting our communities. So really, a lot of people I talk to are asking about the safety, and it's what our juveniles are doing. So how we can work together. I know that there's already some commitments coming up on the books for people to start having those conversations. But when we talk about next steps, I think this is a big piece of that next step that we need to look at.
Okay. We're going to try to get another question in here. Time is getting a little short, but we want to get to as many as possible. And again, if you've submitted a question out there, WGTE has promised everybody gets an answer.
I'm hoping that our justice system can implement more restorative justice principles if they are not already. There have been so many people killed, but I feel like we move on so quickly. I want the criminals to see the lives affected beyond the person killed. Our youth need to hear from victims' families and what they have done. Additionally, how can we get the media to tell a story that garnishes empathy for victims and families without making the public believe all youth have been complicit in their crime?
Panel, let's hear from you.
Restorative justice is absolutely key. We do some programs like we work with Councilwoman Williams, and we go out and our clients go out and clean up the district, clean up houses, clean up the neighborhood, trying to show that not only can we give back, can we fix, can we help our community grow, that we want to be a part of it.
Let's define terms. So everybody, restorative justice to you means what?
Restorative justice to me means the victims get some answers, some face-to-face time. We're not there yet in doing that. However, we're slowly as a system walking into that process. in some ways, but that's a very difficult thing to accomplish.
Jerry, constitutionally, we've created restorative justice process with the passage of Marsy's Law and the rights of victims in the process for cases, disposition cases, their ability to be heard prior to a disposition of a case. All right. So that was passed by an initiative. It's part of the Ohio Constitution now. And the last General Assembly passed laws implementing how does one enact Marsy's Law. The courts are now wrestling with, and the parties are now wrestling with, what does that mean to the dispersing of justice, the processing of cases, when victims' rights are being asserted and are articulated within the context of cases. But it is being recognized.
Do we have time for one quick question? Let's go.
Concerned about how much community safety benefit is derived from locking offenders up for 10, 15 more years, and think there should be a second and third look at the 10 and 15-year mark. What criteria is developed to judge worthy of early release? Speak to the treatment aspect of the new jail and what treatment will be provided by whom and what modalities. Will this be primarily mental health or substance addiction or both?
Let's narrow that down, because that's we have short time, and that was a broad question.
I'll
Yes,
answer
go.
the piece about the jail. I'll answer the piece about the jail, and then I'll hand the other pieces over to the judges. But is that in the jail, we're going to have a mental health ward, a mental health area. And so, and remember, though, a lot of people who are coming to our jails are only in there for about 3 days. So trying to get them access to the mental health services they need is going to happen, but then it's also connecting them to that so that when they leave the jail, that they continue to have that mental health services. And so that's going to be a piece within the jail. And the question earlier, though, too, is when's the jail going to be built? We'll be starting to see some of that rising out of the ground this summer or early fall.
All of you saw the first panel tonight. You sat in the front row, and before we dismissed them, we asked all of them, because we can sit here and talk about, well, we need to do this, we ought to do that. I would like everybody to give me a short, to the point, but workable action step that we can follow you on. Go.
I would like to make the case that what is happening in our community generally is working, certainly when it comes to public safety in general. Lisa's right. The violence we have seen is skewed toward youth. But generally speaking, there's no question that Toledo's a safer place today than it was a year and a half ago. Numbers are down across the board. I know we're not quite where we want to be on the goals of the MacArthur grant, but I think we'll get there. We are making the structural changes that, at least in the case of public safety, are tangibly, mathematically proven to be working. And the MacArthur grant goals, I know we'll get there. However, and here, this is where the public can help. I know. I am, like Popeye, I am what I am. These are fundamentally long-term things. They're not overnight. Pete Gerken, Lisa, these judges, they all deserve credit for doing the fundamentally politically unpopular thing, and that is investing in things that might bear fruit in 5 or 10 years. We need the public to work with us to embrace a patient approach, even as we work like heck to make sure the neighborhood is safe tonight.
Judge Tim Kuhlman.
I want to assure the community that we are studying what we do, and we are measuring our results and making sure that what we're doing is right. I also need to say that the greatest common denominator in the Lucas County Jail and any jail is not the color of skin. The greatest common denominator are two things. One is poverty, and one is almost everybody in jail was raised without a dad. We haven't mentioned that one time. I think everybody here knows that's true. We need dads, we need fathers to be fathers, and we will never, ever fix the problems caused by boys and girls being raised without fathers. We'll never fix that in the court system.
Thank you, Judge. Chief?
So I'll be quick since the mayor wasn't. Invest in your family, invest in your friends, invest in your community, and be on the lookout for what's happening and try to prevent the violence before it starts.
Second round.
Quickly for us, we have reduced technical violations. We continue to reduce technical violations, and every one of those people that aren't violated don't end up in jail. And that's what we do to eliminate incarceration and keep families together.
Thank you. Judge?
Proactive engagement by the one entity that's not here, the prosecutor's office. They're the entity that can help expand deflection. They're the entity that is charged with the task of what charges shall be filed and how cases are disposed of in terms of plea bargains and disposition post. Their more active engagement is crucial for moving our successes forward.
Hold your thought for a moment. Let's make a commitment right here. The prosecutor's office will be in attendance at our next town hall meeting. Great. I don't have that confirmation from them, but they're going to be here, okay?
Jerry, I do want to acknowledge, we did get good participation from the city prosecutor's office. The population review, and I think Rebecca Facey, if I am not mistaken, yes, there she is, our city prosecutor's right there. That population review committee couldn't have succeeded without their engagement. I'm talking about the county prosecutor.
level, I got you. Final word over here, Commissioner.
Well, I'm going to say my commitment is that we continue to have these conversations and not have a length between the conversations. Because I think the more that we talk, but more importantly, I should back that up, the more we should listen. Listen, and then have quick actions behind that from our community.
I would like to thank each of our panelists, first panelist, panelists, for their participation, both in our town hall tonight and also in the Safety and Justice Challenge. Remember, in Lucas County, if you read Lucas County's stated goal, included in there, it says a safer, healthier, and more just community. Hard to argue with that. You can keep the conversation going on our website. Please check out Jason Hibbs' podcast when they drop later on this year. My thanks to our audience here tonight in the McMaster Center here at the library. I want to thank our producer, Sean Potgieter, Director of Marketing and Communications at WGTE, Matt Rennie, WGTE's Public Media Content Director, Ray Miller, the President and CEO, Marlene Kaiser. Jason Hibbs, thank you so very much for being here. Crew, outstanding. It's great to be with you. Special thanks to our hosts here at the Toledo-Lucas County Public Library. My name is Jerry Anderson. Take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and thank you so much for being with us tonight.